Thanks everyone for coming tonight. We really appreciate it. Looking like we're gonna have a really good attendance. Once again, thanks everyone for joining us this evening. I know there's going to be people particularly from Britain and Ireland and from Colombia. So welcome to everyone, and welcome to anyone else from any other countries. It's really fantastic that you've been able to join us tonight. I'm just going to start with some technical information about translation, so nothing is lost for anybody. There is going to be translation into English and Spanish. So if you want translation into English, so if you don't speak Spanish and you need translation into English, if you look for the button that looks like a globe or a planet and it says interpretation, you click on that and you select English. That means you'll get translation into English. So if you need translation into English, select the English channel. And just keep it on that channel the whole time, regardless of who's speaking. And you'll always hear the native speaker if they're speaking in English. And if someone's speaking in Spanish, you'll hear the translation into English. I'm just going to say that same thing in Spanish, so just bear with me for 1 second. Hola a todos y a todas. Antes de empezar voy a explicar cómo prender la traducción. Vamos a tener personas hablando hoy en castellano y en inglés. Entonces, si solamente hablan castellano, necesitan seleccionar la opción para que escuchen la traducción al castellano. Entonces, si buscan el botón que tiene una imagen de un planeta y dice interpretación, seleccionas eso y escoges español. Entonces, si necesitas traducción al español, selecciones español y dejas ahí por todo el evento y escucharás a la persona hablando en castellano, si es su voz regional, y si hay traducción al castellano, escucharás la traducción. If there's anyone who speaks both English and Spanish, you can just leave the interpretation function to off and you'll always hear the original language. Okay, fantastic. If you have any problems with the translation during the event, just post that into the chat and we'll hopefully pick that up. Just to let everyone know that the event today will be being recorded. And I'll invite questions to be put into the chat. We were hoping to have the Q&A function working for this evening, but it doesn't seem to be working. So we're going to use the chat. So later on, when we're coming towards the end of the interventions, I'll ask you to put in any questions there. We have until 8 o'clock this evening. We have 5 speakers. We're going to ask them to speak for 10 minutes each, and then we'll have a little opportunity for some Q&As. Okay, so my name is Hassan. I'm Director of Justice for Colombia. For people that don't know me, I'm going to be hosting today's event. It's an event that we're hosting on looking at the current peace and human rights situation in Colombia. It's hosted by Justice for Colombia alongside the TUC. The TUC is the trade union congress for unions in England and Wales, representing 5.5 million workers. And of course, the TUC has its own international work with Colombia as one of its priority countries, but it's also one of the founding organizations and close collaborator with Justice for Colombia. For those of you who maybe aren't aware of Justice for Colombia, we're an organization that was set up over 15 years ago by the trade union movement, specifically in response to the high levels of violence against trade unionists in Colombia. And the idea was of different trade unions and trade unionists that got together at this time was to create a permanent international campaign to respond to that violence and have a campaign that was able to campaign more broadly on issues relating to human rights, peace, and social justice in Colombia. Over the years, our support base has broadened to include also the Irish trade union movement, and we're very much today the campaign organization of the British and Irish trade union movements. And we also work very closely with a number of politicians in both countries with the aim of amplifying the voices of activists in Colombia. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. We really have an absolutely amazing panel. It's going to be a great event. I'm going to introduce them all shortly. But for those of you who maybe aren't aware of who all the different people are, we have really high profile figures who are going to be able to give us a really up-to-date information on the latest from Colombia, and also in terms of what's happening internationally in support of both peace and human rights in that country. We know that right now there is a worsening and severe human rights crisis in Colombia. We're seeing hundreds of social activists being killed every year. And we know also that we have a peace agreement that was signed several years ago with a lot of international support. But unfortunately, the implementation of that agreement has been going far slower than many would have hoped. Now, this week saw the UN's International Day of Peace on Monday, on the 21st of September. And it's also exactly 4 years since the signing of the peace agreement in Colombia. And that's why, together with the TUC, we thought this was a suitable time to hold this event as part of our ongoing international work to build support for the Colombian peace agreement. So I'm going to introduce our speakers now. And I just remind them, all our speakers tonight, about translation, that there will be translation. So if they can just speak a little bit slower than maybe they might normally do. And just a reminder, there'll be 10 minutes per speaker. And I'm sure I'll probably mention that again during the evening. So we have with us this evening, we have Raul Rosende. Thanks for joining us, Raul. Raul is the verification director of the UN verification mission in Colombia. We have Mariela Cohen, who is the senior international officer at the TUC. She's also the former director of Justice for Colombia and was advisor to the peace talks in Havana. We have Victoria Sandino, senator for the FARC political party and the negotiator for the FARC during the talks. And we also have Emily Thornberry MP, the Shadow Secretary of State for International Trade from the Labour Party. I'll introduce all of them more fully when I hand over to them to speak. But first up this evening, we have with us Iván Cepeda. Thanks so much for joining us, Iván. Iván is a senator in Colombia for the Democratic Pole Party, and he's one of Colombia's most well-known human rights defenders. He's a spokesperson for the human rights organization Movice, which is the movement for the victims of state crimes. His father, Manuel Cepeda, was a well-known left-wing politician, and he was very sadly assassinated in 1994. Iván has campaigned to uncover links between paramilitaries and Colombian politicians, including the former president Álvaro Uribe, who is currently under house arrest in a case in which he and his lawyer are accused of manipulating witnesses in an attempt to incriminate Cepeda. Iván has long suffered from targeted death threats, and these have intensified over recent months. He joined Justice for Colombia at the Labour Party conference in 2015 and is a long-standing peace campaigner. And he played a really important role in facilitating an environment which allowed the recent peace talks to take place. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over now to Iván. Thanks so much, Iván. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you all. Thank you, Justice for Colombia, and also the TUC, and very warm welcome to everyone who's with me today on the panel. So 4 days after the signing of the historic peace agreement between the FARC and the Colombian government, we are taking the time today to look at what is happening today and to provide some context to this analysis in relation to what is happening in Colombia and also other parts of the world in the context of a breaking or an attempt to destroy an already weak democratic order in the institutional structure of Colombia. We see that there's a hyper concentration of power in the executive branch and an attempt to eradicate the high courts of justice, and specifically the special jurisdiction for peace, and also eliminating of Congress's functions. So currently, this situation, it's very important to understand what is happening in the peace process. It has been attacked both by the government and the government's party, and this is an aim to substitute the implementation of the peace agreement with a policy that the government calls peace with legality. And what it has actually done is to increase the cycle of violence, which I believe there are four major characteristics. One is a proliferation of armed groups and a strengthening of the paramilitary structures. So even though they have never stopped existing, we see that there was a drop maybe during the peace process negotiations. We see now that there is an intensification of the military presence in the regions where the agreements should be implemented. This presence has been strengthened in some regions with elite battalions from the U.S. military. And we also see growing tension on the Venezuelan border. So this spiral, or this new cycle of militarization of the regions, has very concerning results, including the murder of 215 social leaders, according to the human rights organization Indepaz, and also 61 massacres just this year, which has left more than 240 people murdered. So many of these incidents, as I said before, are happening in the regions where the peace agreement should be implemented. And the government is saying these are regions of the future, but we can see specifically in the Pacific region, the southern Pacific region, and along the Venezuelan border, specifically in Catatumbo, we see a 50% increase in the violence and a focus of the violence in these two regions where there is a presence of the U.S. elite brigades, which has allegedly come to control or reduce the violence. The government of President Duque explains these incidents, stating that what has happened is that the peace process has allowed for an increase in coca leaf crops, and that is the foundation of this spiral of violence. However, paradoxically, it's important to say that they haven't had any significant efforts to implement the fourth chapter of the agreement, which is specifically focused on resolving with social solutions to the coca problem in these regions. The government's only solution to this problem with drug trafficking is forced eradication and the aerial fumigation of illicit crops, which has already been shown to be a failed strategy. So among these different factors that are very concerning in relation to the implementation of the peace agreement, I'd like to specifically know what's happening with the special jurisdiction for peace, which is one of the central points of the agreement. What's called the HEP, the special jurisdiction for peace, has been attacked in an ongoing and inclement manner by the government over the last 4 years, and most specifically during President Duque's administration. There have been multiple attempts to suffocate this jurisdiction, which looks to respond to the victims' needs. There have been ongoing media and political attacks. The President of the Republic has demanded that the magistrates for demanding immediate results, when at the same time the government party has made great efforts to obstruct its actions and the implementation of the legal framework for this special jurisdiction. It has tried to turn the special jurisdiction into a space that is only looking at the crimes of the ex-guerrilla members and has excluded the military members and high-level civilians who are involved in crimes against humanity. And today we're still discussing within the government caucus whether there'll be new laws or bills to continue reforming the special jurisdiction 4 years after it was approved. So regardless of all of these challenges, the special jurisdiction has had important results. I believe there are 120,000 victims who are covered by the 4 macro cases that are being studied by the special jurisdiction, and there are a lot of possibilities that in the months that come there will be the first rulings from the special jurisdiction, and without a doubt they are investigating the mass crimes and crimes against humanity, the gravest crimes that have been carried out in the last half century. So for the jurisdiction is a major concern that it hasn't been possible that the government guarantees the security both of the victims and the ex-guerrilla members who are appearing before the system. And here it's important to remind, and I'm sure Victoria will give us more details, there are 129 ex-guerrilla members who have been assassinated since the peace agreement was signed. I think it's important to highlight that just recently, in the last few days, the FARC political party and its leadership has launched a public press release and where they have recognized their responsibility in kidnappings, and they have asked that the hearings related to other issues that are being addressed by the special jurisdiction, where they recognize their responsibility, are made public. So I would like to highlight that part of the effects of the peace agreement, it has woken up this very interesting dynamic where people are asking for the truth in relation to the crimes committed, and these anti-democratic measures are trying to cover up or suffocate these efforts for truth and justice in relation to the major crimes, the grave crimes that have been carried out over years in Colombia. And it is precisely for that reason that I make a call not just to back and support the peace agreement, but also to call for attention to the non-implementation, but also more specifically to back and support the special jurisdiction for peace, the Truth Commission that will shortly present its first reports, as well as the search unit for allegedly disappeared people, which is the 3 entities of the comprehensive system for truth, justice, reparation, and non-repetition in this peace process. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Iván. Thank you for that summary and covering so much in just the 10 minutes as well. There's no doubt that the commitment that you have and show to peace and human rights in Colombia, and the dignity with which you respond to all the attacks that come your way is no doubt an inspiration for so many people. So thank you so much for everything you do and for sharing that today. And that last point about the support for the transitional justice mechanisms and the importance of that from an international perspective is definitely something that we take we're very clear on in our work at Justice for Colombia. So I'm going to move swiftly on to our next speaker. Next up we have Raul. Raul, thanks so much for joining us. I know that you're in the northeast of Colombia at the moment, in a region of in northeast, a very problematic region. Raul is the director of verification at the UN verification mission in Colombia, and he also led the advanced team that went to Colombia in February 2016. The UN mission, for those that maybe aren't aware, is mandated by the UN Security Council to verify the implementation of the peace agreement in Colombia, particularly certain chapters, the chapters on security guarantees and the reincorporation of former combatants. He's previously been the UN humanitarian coordinator in northern Syria between 2014 and 2016, and has also worked in Yemen, Afghanistan, Palestine, Guatemala, and Nicaragua. And in 2006 to 2008, he was previously in Colombia heading the UN's humanitarian mission. So Raul, I'm going to pass over to you now.
Thank you, Hassan. Certainly greetings from Catatumbo, where I stay now. Thank you also to Justice for Colombia and to the Trade Union Congress for organizing this event. I think this kind of events are very important in order to help to keep the international attention on the peace agreement in Colombia. You know, 4 years have already passed since the signing of the agreement and 3 years since the disarmament of FARC. So it's very important to keep the commitment and the interest of the international community on Colombia, on the peace process, on the peace agreement. And certainly these kind of events are very instrumental and very relevant in order to keep the international attention on the peace agreement in Colombia. So thank you very much for inviting us. And speaking about the international commitment to Colombia, I would like to emphasize the permanent, consistent, and unanimous support by the Security Council, the UN Security Council, to the implementation of the peace agreement in Colombia. Since 2016, the Security Council has been very consistent in expressing its support and its commitment to the implementation of the peace agreement in Colombia. Every 3 months, we have special sessions on Colombia by the Security Council, in which our mission presents the verification report. And in each of these occasions, relentlessly, consistently, the Security Council expressed the support to the peace agreement in Colombia. So I think it's very important to highlight the international commitment to the peace process in Colombia. Also, I would like to emphasize at this point, and after 4 years, it is important to take stock of some of the key results already produced by the peace process in Colombia. The beginning of the process had very significant achievements, and it's important at this point not to forget these achievements. Initially, the ceasefire between the government and FARC went very well, was very well implemented. There were very, very few incidents on this ceasefire. And I would like to say that compared to the international experience, probably in the recent times was one of the best implemented ceasefires in the world. And secondly, the second stage at the very beginning of the peace process, the disarmament of FARC, also it went very well. According to all the international standards, the disarmament went very well. It was done in a very short period of time. A very high number of weapons were handed over, and the international verification was very strong. It was a very much verified disarmament process. So I wanted to highlight these two elements, the ceasefire and the disarmament, how well they went, because at this point, and as I said, after 4 years, it's very important to recall these results of the process. The current issues. I would like to emphasize the reintegration process of former combatants and the security guarantees for former combatants and also for communities. On the reintegration process, first, let me say that the reintegration of former combatants is not a process of providing privilege to a certain segment of the population. It is not. It is a national need. The entire nation, the entire country needs a proper and successful reintegration process for the stabilization of the country, for improving security, and for the success of the peace process. It's very important that the reintegration process goes well. Usually when we speak about reintegration, we speak about 4 dimensions. We speak about political reintegration, economic reintegration, legal reintegration, and security of former combatants. How we are in this sense. On political reintegration, I will say that there are good news. There are good news because the political party was formed. The political party, the FARC political party, is functioning, and the parliamentarian group of the party is also performing in the Congress, and several law projects were presented by the new FARC party. So in this sense, I think the process went well. On economic reintegration, well, initially the process was very slow. There was a slow start of the process. Now the process is picking up. There are more, there is a high number of economic projects of reintegration, and more former combatants now are covered by productive projects, around 40%, more or less. And in this regard, I would like to highlight the permanence of the settlements, where still a high number of former combatants are living, what is called spaces for reintegration, ETCRs, because of the acronym in Spanish. 24 ETCRs are functioning. Most of them are located in very far away areas of historical conflicts, in which there are health centers, schools, infrastructure. So there is a seed of the state. There is an initial presence of the state in areas where the state was never present. So this is also important to maintain and to keep these reincorporation areas. On security, well, on security, unfortunately, we have now this high number of former combatants killed in Colombia. More than 220 have been killed, and probably this is one of our main concerns, the killing of former combatants, people who handed over in good faith the weapons, now are being killed. And this is, of course, one of the most concerning aspects of the implementation of the peace process. And of course, it goes together with the killing of social leaders, and in the recent month also the massacres that took place in some of the conflict areas of the country. Concerning security, I think that we need to move forward on 3 or 4 main fronts. Firstly, the proper deployment of the state agencies in the conflict areas. In Colombia, we have vast areas of the country where historically the state has never had presence, or where the state presence has been very, very weak. So it's very key to increase the presence of the state in order to establish the rule of law properly, effectively in those areas. Particularly today, some of the areas on the Pacific coast are suffering very high level of violence. Secondly, the issue of criminal investigation of the killings. Concerning the killings of former combatants and social leaders, it's very important to go deeply into the criminal investigation and to identify not only the material authors of the crimes, not only the material killers, but also the intellectual killers, the intellectual authors of the crimes. Third, I will say that it's very important to move forward with the formulation and approval of the public policy on dismantling criminal organizations. The peace agreement created a special commission, the Commission on Security Guarantees, with representation of the government, state institutions, and civil society. They are discussing a draft on public policy for dismantling the criminal organizations. It's very important to approve and to start to implement this policy. And finally, I will say also that another important point to move forward on security in the territories is the proper financing and implementation of the PENIS, which is the national program on illicit crop substitutions, which is key in order to avoid illicit money going to the armed groups. My final point, which also relates to reintegration of former combatants, of course, and is broader, is in relation with the transitional justice system. The point 5 of the agreement creates an entire architecture of transitional justice. Well, it's very key to preserve and to maintain this architecture of transitional justice system, particularly what is called in Spanish the JEP, which is the Special Jurisdiction for Peace, which is key in order to guarantee the rights of the victims to trust, and referring to which also the Security Council of the UN has said permanently that this is very key to preserve the independence and the autonomy of the Special Jurisdiction for Peace. Thank you very much, Hassan.
Thank you, Raul. Thank you so much. And we all obviously are very aware of the importance of the UN mission in Colombia in regards to the peace process. And on a personal level, in terms of Justice for Colombia's work to support implementation of the peace deal, we have been running delegations over the last couple of years under the banner of what we've called the JFC Peace Monitor. And the visits, when we visit, the meetings with the UN mission are, a really fundamental part of that. So thanks for everything you do to facilitate those meetings and the support for those visits to Colombia. So next up, I'm going to pass to Mariela. Mariela Cohen, she is the Senior International Officer at the TUC. She's also the former Director of Justice for Colombia. And from 2016 to 2018, she was contracted by the Norwegian government to work as an advisor to the FARC peace negotiating team. She was particularly involved in the negotiations on the agreements chapter on international verification, and was responsible for liaising with members of the UN Security Council and the UN verification mission in Colombia. As I was saying, she's the former Director of Justice for Colombia, and among many other things, in this role, she led an initiative to engage cross-party actors from Northern Ireland and South Africa, figures key to the peace process in South Africa, and she engaged with them so that they could share their experiences with both sides in the Colombian peace negotiations. So Mariela, I'm going to pass over to you now. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Hassan. Un saludo muy grande a todos los colombianos y a Victoria, Iván, Raul. I'm going to speak in English, but I just wanted to say what an honor it is to share the panel with all of you. It really is a huge privilege to speak alongside such brave, inspirational people. As Hassan said, the TUC considers Colombia a priority for international work, not just because it's still considered one of the worst places in the world for workers and for trade unionists. The International Confederation of Trade Unions has repeatedly highlighted Colombia in that terrible top 10 list, but it's also because as trade unions, we support any efforts for peace and for social justice, and continuing with that internationalism of the trade union movement. I think Iván and Raul have both alluded to things that I wanted to, talk about in terms of the human rights situation and the really alarming deterioration of the human rights situation since Duque came to power. Just in terms of trade unionists, we've seen 49 trade unionists murdered in the last 2 years. and a number of other sectors of society, as has already been mentioned, social leaders, the figures vary, but some estimates are over 400, some are, up to 700 since the peace agreement was signed. The extent of massacres that we're seeing on the ground, the UN in August said that they'd verified 33 massacres already this year. And this goes alongside of increasing authoritarianism. We're seeing a whole range of measures in place and moves by the government, which really are alarming. Soldiers that are given high-ranking positions who have been implicated in abuses, the scandal earlier this year with the military intelligence spying on opposition figures, on journalists, and really some of these things are really reminiscent of the times under Uribe and some of the worst times of human rights situations. We're seeing killings, obviously, by the paramilitary groups and these new paramilitary groups, but also by state agents, as referred to with this, this awful killings just the week before last of around 13 protesters in Bogota by the police. The UN Human Rights Rapporteur has said that these killings of social leaders do have a pattern. Human rights organizations talk about these being systematic. But what we see is a government really that denies this and really lacks empathy for these killings. Added to this are huge levels of impunity, which is a historic problem in Colombia, the lack of actual bringing people, the perpetrators, and not just the hired gunmen, but also the intellectual authors of a lot of these murders. I think, in the current situation under COVID, another thing that, the trade union movement has alerted to is that in November, there were huge protests, not just by the unions, but huge sectors of civil society protesting and calling for the peace process to be implemented, but also against some of the economic measures that were being brought in that were going to be detrimental to, to workers on labor rights, on social rights. And what they allege is that under the context of this state of emergency under Duque, measures are being pushed through, quite undemocratically. In terms of the peace agreement, I think a lot has already been said, but I guess what I wanted to highlight is that in many cases, what this administration is doing is what some people are talking about, simulating implementation of the peace agreement, and actually sometimes distorting the nature of the agreement or creating parallel structures to implement supposedly what's in the agreement, but very often excluding civil society from those processes, as it tried to do with the issue of security. One thing about the peace agreement is that it's comprehensive. It was negotiated in a way that it's interlinked. So, for example, the two chapters that deal with really the root causes of the conflict, the chapter around rural reform and the chapter around political participation, we've seen the least implementation of those chapters. And the issue of rural reform is very much linked to the chapter around coca crops and the use of crops for illicit purposes. Instead of implementing the agreement, which really provides quite a groundbreaking roadmap to dealing with the issue of coca and implementing, infrastructure and investment in the countryside, this administration has taken, a repressive approach. It's even talking about returning to fumigations. It's forcibly forcing peasant farmers to eradicate coca crops and not providing them with the alternatives that they need to be able to create a sustainable living. Similarly, on political participation, there hasn't been the implementation of the elements of the chapter on political participation that really would open up democratic space. And that is another root cause of the conflict in Colombia. It's the lack of that democratic space for opposition forces, for progressive forces. And Transparency International, the organization, just recently released a report saying that there's a worrying concentration in Colombia of the power in the executive. And we're seeing this in many ways. My participation in the peace process was very much around the last chapter of the peace agreement, which was around international verification. So very much liaising with the UN mission and other mechanisms. And I have to say, it was a crucial condition for the FARC that there was international verification of this implementation. And the importance of that can't be underestimated. I think one thing that the TUC administration needs to be reminded of by the international community is that this agreement is not down to their, political position on the FARC or on peace or on the agreement. The agreement is an internationally recognized official document. It's been circulated in the Security Council as an official document, and the government has an obligation of the state to implement it. It's not just a Santos agreement, it's the Colombian state peace agreement. So they do have international obligations to implement it. And this agreement isn't about the FARC. This is an agreement that will benefit all of Colombia. I think one mistake that is often made by people maybe that don't understand Colombia so well from the international community is thinking that the disarmament of the FARC was somehow, the end of the peace process, or that was what the aim of the peace process was. That's one part of it. But the fact is most of the peace agreement is about changing Colombia for the benefit of the Colombian people. And the FARC, I have to say, are the party that complied with their obligations. They handed in their weapons in good faith. They became a legal political party. They're showing up to the truth and justice process. And as you've heard, just last night, a FARC member was killed. It's 229 FARC members have been assassinated since they signed that agreement. And where is, the outrage about that situation? I think I just want to end on really something around, the international context. I think when the talk started, there was a very different regional context. You had Obama in power, you had strong left administrations in the region. And obviously in the last years, we've seen the shift in the US. We've seen a whole, series of processes of lawfare against progressive administrations in Latin America. And we see Colombia's government focusing on Venezuela, on attacking Venezuela as part of its foreign policy. And I think the international community has to be, really careful to not allow those dynamics to influence on how much it's pressuring the Colombian government to implement the peace agreement. And like Raul said, there has been constant support from the Security Council, but we need more pressure, more highlighting of the abuses. The lack of coverage of the situation in Colombia is quite alarming when you look at, the disproportionate coverage of other places. There isn't an outcry here about what's happening, apart from within, the labor movement. And why is it relevant to us? The UK has historic responsibility in Colombia. It provided military assistance during the conflict, and it's now the penholder in the Security Council for the peace process. So it's positioned itself as a supporter of the peace process. As we leave the European Union, the trade agreement between the EU and Colombia is transferred to us. I know Emily may allude to that later on, but I think we have very much clear, responsibility to raise these issues up the agenda. And I really think it's hugely valuable, the amount of trade unionists that are at this event, and I know several MPs are also attending. The contribution of MPs to this campaign is huge. Anything you do does have an impact. So I think that's, really valuable. And for us as trade unionists, we're internationalists. This is an issue about internationalism, about solidarity, and about learning from each other, because we have a huge amount to learn from the struggle of the Colombian people. And I will just end there really to place on record just my huge admiration for everything the Colombian movement does for peace, and to share the panel with someone like Victoria, who's a great champion of women's rights, of equality, and who's done so much for the peace process, and with Iván, who is one of the bravest human rights defenders I've ever had the privilege to work with, and everyone that works on the ground in some of those really difficult circumstances. So I pay tribute to all of you, and to Raul's contribution as well, and all the commitment they have. So please get involved, and support the campaign. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mariela, and I'm sure anyone that's been around Justice for Colombia or TUC or from the British Irish side or from the Colombian side would also respond about your personal commitment to advancing issues around peace and human rights in Colombia on the international stage, and how much work you've done to raise that as an issue over here, in the trade union movement and also in parliaments as well. And I know you continue to do that in the TUC now, along with other international issues. And maybe just to take this opportunity, as Mariela was just doing, just to emphasize and give huge respect to the huge amount of support there is in the trade union movement for these issues in Colombia. You know, I came to Justice for Colombia about just over 7 years ago, and I had no idea about how much commitment there was to supporting people in Colombia, people working for social change in Colombia. You know, JFC is an organization fully funded by the trade union movement. We're a small organization, but we're able to function because of the support and the commitment of the trade unions. And that support is financial, but it's also political. And just last week, there was a letter sent out, signed by over 20 unions that you can see on the Justice for Colombia website, speaking out against the current human rights crisis that they were seeing in Colombia. And that was a letter written to the Human Rights Commissioner in the Colombian presidency. And I know there's lots of people at this event today, lots of names I was going to call out. I was noting them down, but there's far too many to read them all out. But just you know, a greeting to you all, and just a little shout out to the colleagues from Ireland who are on the call, representatives of Irish trade unions, Kevin, Patricia, and Anne I saw there as well. So thanks all of you for all your support and commitment to Colombia and to supporting JFC. So next up, I'm going to pass to our fourth speaker. Thanks so much for joining us today, Victoria. It's a real pleasure to have you with us. Victoria Sandino is a senator in the Colombian Congress for the FARC political party. This was a party that was formed as a result of the peace agreement signed in 2016. And she was also a member of the national executive of the FARC. She was a trade unionist and political activist before joining the FARC and becoming a FARC commander. In 2013, she joined the FARC negotiating delegation in the peace talks taking place in Havana. As head of the gender subcommittee, she spearheaded efforts to incorporate gender equality into the agreement and was also key in ensuring the agreement had a focus on African, Colombian and indigenous issues. Following the signing of the agreement, she was a member of what's called the CICIVI, which I won't translate directly because it probably won't make sense in English anyway, but it's the implementation oversight body. It was created as part of the peace agreement with representation from both the Colombian government and the FARC to monitor implementation. She attended Labour Party conference in 2018 as a guest of Justice for Colombia and the Parliamentary Friends of Colombia group of MPs. Victoria, it's great to have you here. I'll pass over to you now.
Thank you, Hassan, and also warm hugs for Mariela, for parliamentarian Emily, and obviously for Iván and Raul as well. We always come together when we are fighting for peace in Colombia. And also, I'd like to say hello to all the people who are connected today and all the people who continue working for Colombia, the people who have come to visit our territory and have been able to see firsthand everything that has to do with peace in Colombia and the human rights situation or the human rights crisis that our country is facing. So I'd also like to send warm greetings to the TUC in England, from Great Britain, who has always accompanied us in this process. So, just like in general lines, I'd like to talk about a few aspects of the peace agreement in relation to the reincorporation and the cross-cutting perspectives and the concerns that we have specifically in relation to human rights and what is happening with victims. And so, Iván and Raul have already mentioned a couple of these points, but I would like to say that since the signing of the peace agreement, and specifically, for the last 3 years, or 3 years ago when we laid down our weapons. These weapons were collected by the UN mission, and we became a political party. And so I'm talking about the political party of the Common People's Revolutionary Forces, to continue our struggle for fight and the changes that Colombia requires from a legal space and a political space in the regions. However, the first aspect that needs to be mentioned, and we have differences or differences with the people who are doing the monitoring, maybe, or doing the official follow-up of the implementation or the state of the implementation. So, for example, the Colombian state say, "Oh, we just check." I'll say there's, the FARC political party was created, okay, and so that's the process. That's their political reincorporation. Check. Unfortunately, the reality is something else. We should say that we became a political party, but we had also aspired to continue, as I insist you, for our struggle to have a economic, political, social, cultural reincorporation that is aligned with our interests and our goals. And this was a collective focus. We wanted to remain in the regions with the communities, developing productive projects in a collective way from the rural perspective in these populated areas that we were trying to create. But in reality, this didn't happen. So yes, we became a political party, but today there are more than 239 of our colleagues, 229 of our colleagues who have been murdered. We can't visit the international territory. We can't travel to the places where before we were operating when we were armed, where we had been accompanying the communities. And there is a high level of a stigma that was produced by the institutional structure, by the government specifically, and the government party. This stigmatization is against those of us who are in the reincorporation process and who are working for peace. Also, in relation to the economic reincorporation, Raul, I thank you for your intervention, and thank you for what you mentioned about the reincorporation. It is true that the government changed. It changed the focus on what we had decided on for the economic reincorporation. We had decided there'd be these collective productive projects, but in practice this is not what has happened. The government implemented in this individual plan, which looked to disperse our people. Because if the people didn't have economic options in the rural areas or the reincorporation spaces where we were, trying to have this comprehensive reincorporation, it means that it's been much easier to murder our colleagues because they're living in different areas, or they go to places where their families are, or others to work. And we see that this has led to an increased assassination of our members, because these individual plans does not guarantee well-being. It doesn't guarantee that our colleagues can truly enjoy this process in a dignified way. And so this is in relation to the reincorporation. Once again, it's very complex. The human rights context and security situation in Colombia is very, very grave. This is a crisis. As you mentioned, here in Bogota, I'm in Bogota right now, how the police had killed young people as a result of the assassination of a lawyer, but it was the police who also killed in Puerto Tejada. This is the Pacific region of Colombia. They'd also killed a young black man, and nothing happened. There wasn't maybe the same impact from his murder, but today, at 9 a.m. today, the army murdered a woman in Cauca, a woman who was traveling with other people in a car, and she was shot. She was shot to death. And so a country that's transitioning towards peace, that wants to turn the page and leave behind war, we are facing a situation, a crisis, a structural human rights crisis. So in relation to two aspects that have to do with the implementation of the peace agreement, one is that the government, as we've said, has kind of simulated its implementation, but it hasn't actually done this. It's kind of broken apart or modified the agreement, and this is something that's very serious. The only thing that's really functioning properly is, and it has been attacked, but this is, point 5, has to do with the victims and the comprehensive system, because we're talking about the special jurisdiction for peace, where our colleagues, when we have been called, we have appeared and we have contributed our truth in the special jurisdiction, as well as the Truth Commission and the Search Unit. This is our our obligation and our commitment, those of us who were in the war, that the ex-guerrilla men and women, that we are completely willing to contribute the truth, to acknowledge our mistakes and the incidents that we took place within the context that victimized the population, the people in our country. We have always been willing to do this. We have recognized, even before we were required to, we've recognized our mistakes. But maybe the other hand, the state or the third parties, as we call them, they have not provided the truth. No one else has recognized the truth or has contributed to the creation of the truth. And so this is, one of our struggles in Havana during the negotiations of the agreement. And so, for example, we talked about the ethnic chapter, which is focused on the ethnic groups, indigenous and black communities and others. However, this very little has been advanced, and the little that has been done is due to the direct actions of the communities, of the people. The same with the gender perspective. We advanced and we are able to take an essential step forward to include the gender perspective in the agreement. But the few advances that we have seen today is due to the actions of women's groups and the women ex-combatants to be able to have a dignified reincorporation that we have dreamed for so long. So I'd really like to thank the international community for the important role it has played for the accompanied, starting with the UN and the guarantor countries, the European Union, and you all, Justice for Colombia, because you have always been present in supporting this process and listening to our voice. What we are saying, we will continue to say. We will continue calling attention to what's happening in Colombia. Colombia cannot continue in war. We need to focus on peace. We need to achieve peace. So thank you for this very important space. Thank you, all of you, for opening up this space.
Thank you so much, Victoria. Thank you for that intervention, and of course, that you're going to continue counting with the support of Justice for Colombia and the trade union movements here in the search for improved human rights situation and for the full implementation of the peace agreement. And you know, we've been to Colombia, I think 4 times with trade union delegations, with MPs and Irish senators, particularly focused on the implementation of the peace agreement. And I think we've met with you in all of those trips, and it's been clear for everyone who's attended your personal commitment to the peace process and to the peace agreement. So that's been absolutely crystal clear. And also a really important part of those trips has been the visits to the countryside to see what life is like, where the human rights situations are particularly problematic, but also to the reincorporation zones that you spoke about. And on the last trip that we went in February, just before all international travel was suspended, Victoria facilitated our visit to one of the reincorporation zones in West Colombia. So thanks so much for that support and enabling that visit. And if anyone's interested in seeing a short video about that trip, you can have a look at the Justice for Colombia Vimeo page. So I'm sure if you just search Vimeo Justice for Colombia, you'll be able to find that video, and maybe someone can post a link in the chat as well. I'm going to move now to our final speaker of the evening before we move to questions and answers. Emily, thanks so much for joining us this evening. It's a really important part of the panel. Emily Thornberry MP is the Shadow Secretary of State for International Trade. She's previously held the post of Shadow Foreign Secretary, as well as a number of other shadow cabinet roles. She was elected in 2005 as the MP for Islington South and Finsbury. And as many of you may know, JFC has a long-standing relationship with a number of British MPs, and Emily has met with a number of guests from Colombia during Labour Party conferences, people like Iván and Victoria, who have both been to Labour Party conferences as part of JFC visits. And most recently, Emily spoke alongside the president of the Colombian Trade Union Congress at an event organised by the TUC. So Emily, thanks so much for joining us this evening. I'm going to pass over to you now.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to speak on this panel. And it is an honour to be speaking alongside so many impressive, extraordinary people. It's a great pleasure to be here today, and I look back and I think about 4 years on. You know, I think about the signing of that historic peace deal in Colombia, and all the MPs and activists taking part today. We all remember that week very vividly because, of course, it coincided with our annual conference in Liverpool. And there was a genuine sense of joy and celebration amongst all of those from Britain who had spent so many years campaigning in solidarity with our brothers and sisters in Colombia for peace and democracy and human rights. And in the speech that I made at the conference that week, I talked about the courage of the union movement in Colombia and the terrible price that so many had paid in the fight for justice. And I said, but they never gave up, I said. And now, for the first time in decades, thanks to their efforts, there is a real chance of a lasting peace. That was 4 years ago, and so much has happened since then to dampen the joy and celebration that we felt on that day. Because, as we all know, signing a peace agreement and implementing a peace agreement are two very different things. And today, thanks to President Duque, the peace agreement is being actively undermined, in my view, by a government that is meant to be actively implementing it. And we have the spectacle of Alvaro Ojeda potentially and deservedly facing trial for corruption, bribery, and witness tampering, but continuing to enjoy impunity for the human rights abuses committed under his leadership, an impunity which his friends and the Duque government also appear to be enjoying today. But I want to thank my fellow panelists for everything that they're doing to bring attention to the extreme human rights abuses currently taking place in Colombia. And I will join you in doing all I can to highlight those crimes in the British Parliament and to raise the profile in this country of 600 Colombian trade unionists, community leaders, and human rights activists who've been killed since 2016. And thousands more harassed, attacked, and threatened simply for demanding that the terms of the peace agreement are delivered. and for trying to secure a better and more just future for their fellow citizens. And we think especially today of those who have suffered and been killed in their efforts to ensure that the ordinary working people of Colombia can just do their jobs and live their lives for a fair wage and decent conditions, free to organize and represent themselves and have a safety from discrimination, exploitation and abuse. According to International TUC's 2020 report, Colombia is ranked among the world's worst 10 countries for workers' rights and one of 9 countries in the world where workers were murdered last year. It should shame the Duque government that Colombia is ranked worse for workers' rights than the likes of China or Egypt or Belarus. But instead, their actions continue to make the problem worse. And of course, you don't need me to tell you that if union leaders and representatives cannot operate free from violence and intimidation, if their legal status is routinely denied, then it is impossible to even start to challenge all the more mundane but ubiquitous abuses of workers' rights, all the breaches of International Labour Organization ILO standards for which Colombian people suffer every day. So as we mark the 4th anniversary of the peace treaty in Colombia, what Colombian citizens urgently need is not just a government in Bogotá that is genuinely committed to that treaty, but also concerted international pressure to ensure that the protection of their human rights, their labour rights, and their democratic freedoms. And I believe that the United Kingdom has 2 special responsibilities in that regard. First and most obvious, and it's been referred to already, as the pen holder at the Security Council when it comes to the Colombian peace agreement, the UK has a responsibility to the citizens of Colombia to lead the UN in demanding that the agreement is observed and implemented in full by the UK government and by holding them to public account in the eyes of the world if they continue to fail. But as we have found in relation to the Saudi war in Yemen or the genocidal actions of the Myanmar military against the Rohingya people, our current Conservative government is quite happy to hold the pen on these sorts of issues, but it's not so ready to use it when it comes to holding powerful nations and interests to account. That inertia, that cowardice, if you like, would end on day one of a Labour government who would use the UN to hold the Duque government to account and to do what we should be doing. And the second area where the UK has a special responsibility, and this one is of particular importance to me, is in relation to our trade with Colombia and the conditions that we are prepared to set on that trade. My guarantee is that when a Labour government is in charge, future trade agreements that the UK signs with other countries will be made conditional on clear, enforceable commitments to uphold human rights, to uphold democratic freedoms, and meet the full range of ILO rules and standards. But unlike the current Conservative government, we believe in the simple principle that if a country won't respect and protect the rights of their workers, if they won't abide by ILO rules, and if they preside over a justice system where community leaders and union representatives can be murdered with impunity, that is not a country with which the UK should share preferential trade. By contrast, there is not one single post-Brexit trade negotiation conducted by this Conservative government. There is not one single treaty that they have signed which has insisted on more stringent conditions when it comes to the protection of labour rights or human rights. And why is that? Because as the former Australian Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, newly appointed, as we know, to the government's Board of Trade, has said, they consider labour rights to be, and I quote, a peripheral issue that should not get in the way of securing trade deals and filling the massive trade void that will be left behind after Brexit. That is why in 2018, the UK government signed a rollover deal with the Andean countries, including Colombia, which was essentially a cut and paste job, from the heavily criticised and rightly criticised EU Andean countries agreement of 2012. And they did that in the full knowledge of all the criticism that when it comes to human rights and workers' rights, the EU agreement has been both wholly ineffective and is severely out of date. After all, and most basically, when the trade deal was signed, the Colombian peace process had not yet begun. There was no Colombian peace agreement to uphold. And you'd think that a development like that wouldn't have gone unobserved. It would have been significant enough for a UK government to at least attempt to negotiate a new trade deal with Colombia, reflecting the status of the peace agreement and the human rights issues facing the country. But instead they chose to ignore all of that, and we are left with a UK Andean agreement which mirrors the exact flaws of the EU agreement. So instead of providing benchmarks and penalty clauses which would force Colombia to uphold human rights, we are left with a so-called roadmap for the country to follow, which is non-binding and unenforceable. And the respective governments and negotiators can point all they want to the commitments in the trade deal roadmap, to human rights monitors, to respecting labour rights, and to eradicating the drugs trade. But frankly, in my view, none of that matters if those commitments are not binding and they're not enforceable. And unfortunately, the commitments in the trade roadmap are anything but any of those. After all, how can a roadmap hold those who commit human rights abuses to account if there is no provision for the signatories to trigger investigations, to issue sanctions, or to suspend all or part of the trade deal? But if the UK are going to follow in the footsteps of the EU and simply monitor human rights abuses in Colombia rather than issue trade sanctions as a result of them, the very least that they can do, you'd expect, is to involve trade unions in their monitoring bodies. Although I'm afraid that we shouldn't really hold our breath on that, given the track record of this Tory government when it comes to listening to the trade union movement. But a Labour government would be different. When it comes to the negotiation and enforcement of those labour rights provisions in trade deals, we will be different when it comes to involving our trade unions in the negotiation of new agreements and the human rights monitoring bodies required in countries like Colombia. Respect for the rights of working men and women are so often the first thing that governments let slide in times of economic crisis. But a Labour government in Britain must be different, not just protecting those rights at home, but also insisting on their protection abroad. The British Labour Party has always been aware of the responsibility that we have to raise these issues up the political agenda, as we have consistently done in Parliament, but must increasingly try to do through our online campaigning. But as I have said today, we will have an even greater responsibility in government, not just to raise awareness on these issues, but to take action on them at the United Nations and through future trade negotiations. We will ensure that the UK serves as a global champion of human rights and social justice rather than treating them as peripheral issues. We will stand in government for the same values and goals that inspire us in opposition, and we will continue to stand in solidarity with our brothers and sisters in Colombia. I hope that they will know lasting peace in my lifetime. I hope that the civilian conflict and exploitation of workers, which has plagued the country for far too long, will finally come to an end, and that justice will come in its place. That is the very least the people of Colombia deserve, so many of whom have never known proper protections of their rights, so many of whom have never known a period of lasting peace, and all of whom desperately need and want both. This is our shared dream. With a Labour government in place, I promise we will do whatever we can to make it a shared reality. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily. Thank you for that intervention. Thanks for the words of commitment to raise issues regarding Colombia in Parliament and to keep finding ways to advance a more ethical approach to trade agreements in relation to Colombia. I'm sure further afield as well. And just to mention now, all the support that does come from the British Parliament, from different parties, but particularly from the Labour Party. We work closely with a group of MPs who group together in what's called the Parliamentary Friends of Colombia. And on this event today, I've seen, I think they're all still here, Tony Lloyd, Chris Matheson, and Joe Stevens. So thanks for everything all of you do to advance issues of Colombia in the British Parliament. I think, just since coming back from recess at the beginning of September, there's been over 5 or maybe up to 7 questions, if I'm not mistaken, relating to peace and human rights issues tabled in written question form in Westminster. So thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for your interventions. What a really amazing opportunity to have all of you together. We have just over 10 minutes left. So I want to give you all an opportunity to say some final words when we finish. But before that, we've got a few questions that have been coming through on the chat. So what I might do is I've kind of grouped them into 2. One of which, one group is focused maybe more on the situation in Colombia, and then maybe the second group is focused more looking at international efforts to support issues of social justice in Colombia. So the first questions, I might group 3 together and see how it goes. So one of them is asking about whether the military is contributing to truth in the transitional justice process. And I think this was particularly in relation to a statement that one of the people mentioned that was made by one of the mothers of the victims of false positives. For those who may be not aware, what's become known in Colombia as the false positives was a series of killings that took place in the 2000s by the Colombian military, in which they lured civilians, often from poor neighborhoods, away from their homes, often with false offers of jobs. They were then killed and dressed up as guerrillas as a way of increasing the apparent state of military victory in the war. So there's been several thousand killings, and there's that process is now in the transitional justice system. So the question is the military contributing to truth? And maybe a second one, maybe more directly to Iván, is about whether he thinks that Álvaro Uribe will be held to account in Colombia. There's 2 questions there I'll start with. Maybe I'll start with Iván with the second question. You look a bit puzzled there, Iván. Does the question need clarifying? So the question was, does Iván think that Álvaro Uribe will be held to account for his historic crimes in Colombia? And the second question, just to remind everybody, is about the military contributing to truth in the transitional justice system. So over to you all. I'll start with Iván, and then if anyone else just gives me a little indication if they would also like to intervene.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your very interesting presentations. And I'd also like to offer warm greetings to all the people who are following this conference, all the Colombians who are abroad and who are listening to us today. So one of the important elements of the peace process is it has opened up this or released this dynamic of clarifying very serious incidents that have taken place in Colombia. The arising of the System for Truth, Justice, Reparation, Non-Repetition, the HEP or Special Jurisdiction for Peace, but also in other aspects of the judiciary. So recently in Colombia, there's something that was unimaginable before. Our President of the Republic was obligated by the judiciary to lose his freedom, to be detained amid a process of witness tampering, which is related to very serious incidents that which ex-President Álvaro Uribe is being accused. This witness tampering has to do with the fact that 8.5 years ago, he filed complaints about with testimonies from ex-paramilitary members who connected him to the paramilitary structure. And so this demand for truth is connected to the peace process and the demands that have arisen from the peace process, this democratic initiative where many victims and many parts of the judiciary are acting to clarify serious incidents from the past. However, this is a difficult case. There are steps forward and steps backward, and this is a day-to-day struggle in relation to this specific case. So currently, Uribe is being investigated, and we'll see to what point we'll be able to advance. There are huge obstacles within the judicial system. Just yesterday, the magistrates from the Supreme Court have denounced threats against them. But this, in relation to the false positives or the extrajudicial executions, the military is involved, and I think the HEP, the Special Jurisdiction for Peace, will advance. It is advancing, and I think there will be a clarification of these incidents so that they do not remain in impunity.
Thank you, Iván. I should move on to the following questions just because of time. If anyone else wants to bring anything else in, they can bring that in their final closing statements. There's been a lot of questions about international solidarity work, particularly around trade agreements. I'm just going to try and group a couple of questions together. One of which is how to pressure best from London for compliance with the peace agreement. Another relates to the European Union and how trade unions there might help campaigning around the trade chapter of EU-Colombia trade agreement. And a third question just come in related to the recent situation with the Good Friday Agreement and the efforts of a coalition of trade unions and other actors to intervene in terms of the linking the compliance with the Good Friday Agreement to any potential future deal with between Britain and the US. So there's a question about if there's something similar that can be done to leverage pressure in that way around compliance with the Colombian peace agreement in terms of any trade deals that Britain might be entering into or the EU might be entering into with Colombia. So there's a few questions. Maybe I'm thinking to Mariela. Sorry? Who wants to answer the question there? Is there someone putting their hands up? Or Emily, sorry?
I was saying, I think maybe Emily might be better placed on that one.
I didn't see Emily moving much, but let's, Emily, you...
Sorry, yeah, no problem. So what I would say is this, is that there is a great deal of potential in a modern trade policy to be able to use that trade policy to put into action the principles, the ideals that we have as a country, and we can express those within the trade deals that we do. And it's of such profound disappointment that the deal that the EU did with Colombia that was flawed, but it was before even the peace process or the peace agreement supposed to have happened in Colombia. There we are, the pen holder in the United Nations. We're supposed to be taking a leading role. And then when we have an opportunity to be able to exert pressure on Colombia, we simply just flop out, don't even bother to try. And that's the point. The point is that we have not had a trade policy in the United Kingdom for 50 years. We now have to have one, but we have to have a modern one, and we have to have one that will actually work. And we need to start upgrading our trade policy so that we can protect human rights, workers' rights, the environment. We can do something about climate change. We can start putting those into our trade agreements and start making our values something active. And this was a terrible missed opportunity in my view.
Thank you, Emily. Mariela?
Well, I was just going to say, from the TUC, we are working to try and pressure for there to be a monitoring mechanism with the involvement of unions. We're pressuring the government so that there is some kind of mechanism that's set up on this agreement. And I know, even though the agreement is a kind of cut and paste from the EU one, the fact is the peace agreement was signed since that EU deal, and I think there's a strong case to argue for, you know, at least the verification or the results of what's happening with the peace agreement to be taken into account in any future trading deal. And I also think there's something.
And sorry, I mean, just to say, it is also important to, if there was proper information being fed into the British government, then it is open to the British government, now that we've left the European Union, to introduce individual sanctions against those who are breaching breaching human rights. And if we have within our trade agreement monitoring there that can be fed into the EU, then that's something which can be used, you know, not enough, but it's something. Sorry to cut across you.
No worries. I also just was going to say, in terms of general, you know, international pressure, and you know, there's a lot of trade unionists here from around Europe that we work with, I can see on the list, but I think there's, you know, something to be said for trying to get more coverage as well of the situation in Colombia, and trying to get it up the political agenda and expose the hypocrisy really in foreign policy on Colombia compared to other countries where abuses are happening, because I think it's quite extraordinary the extreme situation in Colombia and the lack of coverage of that.
Thank you, Mariela, and my apologies because there's lots of questions coming in. We were hoping to have the Q&A function, which would have facilitated that a little bit more, and you know, we've just run short of time, so it pains me to not ask more of the questions that have been put to the group. Hopefully we can do another event soon where we can give more time to questions, or prioritize some of these questions that have come through today that we haven't been able to give time to. So I'm just going to pass everyone maximum 1 minute just to say some final words. Anyone want to raise their hand who might like to start, or I'll just go back in the order that we went previously? Okay, I'll start then again with, I'll go back to the, yes, let's start the same order. Let's go to Iván.
Okay, so I think that regardless of all the challenges and the huge sacrifices that this process has suffered, that its results and democratic effects are visible in the Colombian society. So, you know, today we see this huge attack against the process. It's because it is so important, it is so significant for the future of the Colombian society, and so that for Colombia to enjoy full peace. So I reiterate my invitation to make this valiant contribution from the international community, and that all of you from the trade union movement in Britain and around the world, that you can continue and strengthen your actions. And so once again, I'd just like to really acknowledge the important work of Justice for Colombia, and also highlight the important role that the verification mission has had in the peace process as well, and the role of the Security Council.
Thank you, Iván. Raul.
Sí, gracias, Hassan. Enfatizar nuevamente que nosotros consideramos que el acuerdo de paz es un logro, pero es un logro no solamente para Colombia. Para Colombia sí, por supuesto, y ya eso sería suficiente. Pero nos parece que es un logro para la comunidad internacional. Nos parece que el acuerdo ha sido un modelo de resolución de conflictos cuyas muchas enseñanzas en el futuro eventualmente puedan ser aplicadas en otras partes del mundo, en otros conflictos, y por lo tanto la importancia de preservar y proteger el acuerdo, la implementación del acuerdo, y la importancia de que la comunidad internacional, como ha pasado hasta ahora, se mantenga comprometida y también involucrada en el apoyo a la implementación del acuerdo de paz. Gracias.
Muchas gracias a ti, Raúl. Mariela.
I would just encourage everyone to get involved in whichever way they can, whatever structures, pressure they can bring to bear for this issue. And just again to, you know, thank Raul and the mission for everything they do, and particularly just thank Victoria and Iván for everything they do, and all the leaders on the ground in Colombia, the bravery they've shown, and just I hope that they take this message of solidarity and the fact that, you know, we are watching and we are thinking about them regularly and admiring them, and we hope that we can help their struggle for peace and justice.
Thank you very much, Mariela. Victoria.
Thank you, Hassan and Mariela. A big hug for you. Thank you for all of your support. Since we were in Havana, you've accompanied this process. From the beginning, also from the parliamentarian Vicky and the solidarity, Hassan, Iván, Raul, everyone who is connected today, and a special recognition for the trade union solidarity from the British trade unions that's always been present, supporting peace in Colombia, accompanying us. And so I'd like to say that, regardless of all the pain, the way our country hurts due to the humanitarian crisis that we're facing today, we continue focused and committed with peace. Peace for Colombia. Peace for Colombia, as Mujica said, is peace for the entire continent. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Victoria. And over to you, Emily.
I think really just in echoing Raul, I think that there have been 3 major international peace agreements that have brought such joy and hope to me. The Good Friday Agreement, what happened in South Africa, moving away from apartheid, and peace, the peace deal in Colombia, which, as Raul has said, was a model of peace agreements. And we need these things to succeed. And although it can be incredibly hard to get the agreements together in the first place, we learn from these 3, I've learned from these 3 agreements that getting the agreement is just the beginning of it, and how much work needs to be done thereafter in order to make sure that they are properly embedded. And if the peace agreement in Colombia is under threat, then we should all be alarmed and alerted to that and be doing everything we can to give it support.
Thank you so much, Emily. Thank you so much again to every single one of the participants today. It's been a fantastic event, amazing to have you all together at the same time. Thank you everyone who has attended. Before you go, just point you towards, now this is, I'm saying this in English strangely, but I think the event will only be in Spanish, but no, it's not, it's in both languages. Fantastic. Okay, well, now it makes more sense I'm saying it in English. So there's a really important event coming on Saturday. There's a coalition of organizations, of the peace negotiators, of activists in Colombia for peace, which is called Let's Defend Peace, which is Defendamos la Paz in Spanish. And we're going to share information about the event in the chat right now. That's this Saturday. That's 8:30 Colombia time, which is 2:30 London time, and then you can work that out from wherever you are. Really important if you can take part in that event. There'll be a whole host of very high-profile speakers involved in the talks and in its implementation. So just to finish, again, thank you all for attending. If you want any more information about Justice for Colombia, visit our website, sign up to the e-bulletins there, and follow us on social media, or get in touch with us at any time through the email on our website. I hope that everyone attending has taken something away with them. I know sometimes it can be heavy and feel quite pessimistic because of the seriousness of the situation, but always there's the inspiration of all of those who are putting in so much energy and effort to make a difference and make a positive change in Colombia. We know that the human rights situation in Colombia is not something that we can turn our back on internationally. The peace process still has huge potential to facilitate an enormous positive change in Colombia. We need to keep up international support for that process and for the full implementation of the agreement. So please get involved with our campaigns if you can. Please do what you can in your trade union or political spaces. And even if it is just making sure you're talking about these issues with your friends and your family, this is all really important to give support to everyone in Colombia who's working for peace and to defend human rights. And to the Colombians who are with us today, you can be sure that Justice for Colombia, together with the TUC and the British and Irish trade union movements and all the politicians who are doing things in their spheres in Britain and Ireland, we're going to continue doing whatever we can internationally to support you in your efforts to promote peace and social justice. Thank you very much, everyone. Good afternoon for everyone in the Americas, and good night for everyone over here. Ciao.